Welcome to this session of the Values Jam guest series. And Hithin, it's great to have you here. Perhaps to begin with, you could just explain who you are, what you do, your great work, and a little bit about Scrubbed Up.
No, thank you, Alan, for having me, firstly, and it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, my name is Hithin. I am a fourth-year medical student at the University of Manchester. But alongside that, I co-founded a non-profit organization called Scrubbed Up alongside my best mate, Maria. So essentially, what we do, we're a non-profit organization with the motto of trying to sort of support medical students getting into medical school and through it as well. So we started in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was very much a pandemic baby that's grown into something that I never thought it would, and it makes me immensely proud to say that. So essentially what we do is the way I like to describe Scrubbed Up is it's a very two-pronged approach. We're a representative platform that want to help prospective students. That's in the form of our free services and free content, and having specially tailored sort of mentorship schemes, for example, targeting sort of refugee and asylum seeker background students, for instance. From that aspect to running sort of events, etc., for current students, supporting them on their journeys, trying to create representative and relatable advice for students like me, and essentially supporting each other throughout that medical school journey. We work with some really cool organizations such as the RAF, Macmillan, the Dave Knott Foundation, just to name a few, to support their sort of initiatives within medical school. And essentially, our aim is to become a representative platform. We started Scrubbed Up because there's so much sort of emphasis nowadays on social media, and there's fantastic work done by many influencers, but not everyone can be an influencer, which is why I wanted to create Scrubbed Up. So an individual can have a platform to share their opinion, and hopefully Scrubbed Up is that platform to do so. And and also the value, and I've certainly seen this in the last 2 years, where all individuals can come together and the collective value of doing so, and that collective value has definitely a power for change. So those are what we stand for, Scrubbed Up, and it's been a pleasure to see the sort of the value of people coming together and doing some really cool stuff. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
That's thank you for sharing that. And from the conversations that we've already had, the bit that I really like about what you're doing is your willingness to allow the community to take its own course, kind of thing. You know, a lot of people, when they're looking to build and create communities, allow their ego to take over and they have to be in control, type of thing. But I sense from what you've described that you're really just looking to be of service to the community and allow it its voice in whatever way that turns out to be. So I'm really looking, I can't imagine how you've done what you've done in such a short period of time in the circumstances that have been in place. So really looking forward to seeing how you grow in the future. So we're going to play Values Jam now. So I've got the deck here. And what I'd like you to do is tell me how many times you'd like me to cut the deck.
Well, I'm going to go three.
Going to go for three. Okay. It's a bit like being on a game show, Hithin. So from left to right, left, middle, or right?
Right, please.
Okay. And I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 cards here. So which number between 1 and 12?
5, please.
Oh, okay.
Innovation, okay.
Innovation. So the way that we play Values Jam is that there are some guiding questions on the back of the card. And the only real guidelines is that we advise people to start with the first question and finish with the last question. But in between, there are 4 questions, but sometimes they're used and sometimes they're not, because sometimes the conversation can just take its own course, which is cool. But the first question I'm going to ask you, and then we'll kind of explore it together. What does innovation mean? And the second part of the question is a metaphor part, which is, what does it look, feel, sound like?
Okay. Um, I'd say the way I sort of envisage innovation is what really excites me, and I think what really excites me about Scrubbed Up and the way Mari and I have approached this has been the fact that we see so many fantastic organizations out there who do fantastic work within the community that I work in, and using the inspiration, using them as inspiration, looking at the problems within the, the society and the medical student and the sort of healthcare world that essentially I'm trying to train to practice in and eventually, and try and see how Scrubbed Up can sort of help and do their bit, and essentially using the collective power and collective platform then trying to build to try and do some good. And essentially that is the innovative aspect of Scrubbed Up that excites me. And that could be big to small. Small being trying to tackle medical students have a particular opinion and a particular problem and trying to create a webinar that solves that problem, for example, that, to something a lot bigger, like running a national charity campaign. So innovation can be big and small, but essentially does this for me does the same thing, where it's essentially out there for myself. I've seen the way I see innovation is it's out there to solve a problem, and that requires innovation to do so, essentially.
Yeah, okay. So interesting that you've used the term to solve a problem there, and I'm thinking what first came into my mind was innovation as creating value where there was not anything there before. Now,
Mm.
I'm just I'm just thinking about what you've just said because am I thinking that innovation could be put in place in a situation where there wasn't necessarily a problem? Because I think sometimes we don't actually realize that things could be done better.
100%.
Obviously, when we know there's a problem, it's kind of easier to put our minds to it, isn't it? But sometimes I'm just trying to think of your world. And in fact, actually, the whole concept of Scrubbed Up is an innovation in itself. Who would have thought to put in place some sort of platform to create a community for this group of people? And just thinking back, when you were giving the concept birth, if you like, did you consider it as solving a problem, or did you consider it more as creating value where there wasn't before?
I think Mara and I had this conversation very recently, actually, and we wanted to help the individual student. And I
Yeah,
said, so essentially, there probably wasn't a problem in place, but we felt that essentially the value of creating a platform that, with its core of helping the individual,
yeah,
and that is getting their opinion across on a platform where there is a collective audience that is listening to it,
yeah,
where the platform has the capacity to be helping the individual and make them feel sort of listened to. And yeah, so essentially, I think that's where it stemmed from. So to answer your question, I don't think there was a particular problem that Scrubbed Up was trying to solve, but essentially, we were trying to do things a bit better. I'd say the one thing also that came to mind, Alan, was that I think innovation is also very scary.
yeah,
Innovation is scary because it's like going down a blind alleyway in a certain sense. I think I've mentioned this to you in the past, where especially for Mara and myself, who have no particular background in sort of starting an organization, starting an MPO. So I think innovation is terribly scary. However, I think the scariest aspect is making that first jump. And
yeah,
I'd say that was the first. But after that, once you do jump, you do feel after that you do feel the parachute sort of coming up, if that makes sense,
yeah,
because you feel you suddenly feel supported, and you suddenly feel like, God, this is a good idea, and that only gives you inspiration to get the ball rolling. But yes, innovation is scary, but I think taking that risk is definitely something I can recommend, and I'm really glad I did 2 years ago. Um, and a sense, also I think with innovation, also it was scary, but I think having someone who, with Mario, my co-founder, who thought like myself, it was useful to have someone there to bounce ideas off.
Yeah.
Innovation also comes from the people around you, and I think having and also someone that thinks very like you. So having Mario there to bounce ideas off, and we thought in similar but also different ways, also help build the organization.
Yeah, and what you've said, actually, first, there's one thing from what you said before. So you mentioned how innovation can be small and it can be big, and I think that's absolutely right. I think sometimes people kind of get conned into thinking that innovation has to be something like massive, world changing. And this is a bit of a strange example, perhaps, but I was working in a bank environment, and the ladies that answered the telephone in New York, one of them had decided to put a smiley face on top of the console where the handset was that they answered. And this was brilliant, because every time they went to answer the phone, they saw a smiley face, which reminded them that that was their job. It might be that this was their 300th call that they've answered today, but for the person on the other end of the line, it's the first call. So I asked whose idea this was, and I was introduced to this lady. And I said to her, would you mind if we replicated this in our key locations around the world?
Mm.
And her jaw just dropped. She was like, what? And I said, yeah, it would be great for us to do this in Hong Kong and Singapore and Tokyo and London and Johannesburg. And she said, what, my idea? You would do that? And I said, well, it's brilliant and it will help everybody be better. So why would we not do that? So I think that is an example of your small, but created enormous impact if you can kind of just scale it.
Yeah.
And of course, the lady was walking on air. She was just like so pleased.
Perfect.
So that was the first thing to mention. And then you mentioned also this thing about innovation being scary, and I think you're right. And it takes some courage actually to kind of dive in. But there's a psychologist called Susan David, and one of the things that she says is that courage is not an absence of fear. Courage is fear walking. And I think that is just
Wow.
so brilliant,
Yeah,
because
that makes sense. Yeah.
the other thing that's connected to that is I've been having conversations, values jam conversations this week, and a recurring theme is that we have much less control and ability to predict the future than we pretend. And so, in that respect, innovation shouldn't be that scary, because all we're doing is kind of diving into the unknown and having the confidence to go with what happens, rather than this kind of false sense of security where we pretend that we're directing everything when in fact we're not. I mean, just not now necessarily, but afterwards, Nithin, have a think about something brilliant that's happened to you, and then ask yourself the question: how much of that did I control and influence, versus how much did something happen from completely nowhere that made the outcome be the case? And maybe another time we'll talk about that.
I guess it's a culmination of both, as in, it's obviously a lot of things are out of your control, but when it comes to certain, if I think back on certain really cool things and really big things that have happened, it'd probably be where I got myself in a position both mentally and just generally worked hard to be in that position where you then you then get that snowball effect of sort of opportunities, I guess, and things that you just never expected to happen. So
Yeah,
I do believe it's a culmination of both,
yeah,
where it's a matter of if you your mindset and sort of making your own luck per se, and
yeah.
then does pay dividends.
I
However,
agree.
there is more to that, and then life works in very different ways. But yeah, I do think if you can make your luck in some extent. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm with you. And for the way that I tend to think of this is about intention. And so the way that I would describe what you've just said is that if you have a clear understanding of what's important to you and your values, and you have a strong sense of intention, and then you just follow that in whatever way you feel, then you give yourself the best chance of those brilliant things happening. But it's this thing about so for instance, this book here, I got invited to a conference in New York to speak about the topic. And the guy said, I can't afford to pay for you to come, can't afford to pay for your flight, fees, hotel accommodation, nothing. And I was like, so the rational voice was saying, well, you can't go then. But another voice in my head was saying, yeah, but they're good guys. And, it's a chance to go to New York and you like the city. So why don't you just go? Then 2 weeks later, the guy sent me the program. And on the same program as me, another one of the speakers was the guy called Philip Kotler, who's regarded as like the father of marketing in the whole world. And it was his textbook that we used to have to read at university for our marketing module. Anyway, long story short, Philip um, endorsed the book. And on the front of the book, it says, An excellent and insightful addition to our business literature by Philip Kotler. Now, there's no way that I could have thought, how could I have that endorsement on this book? But through intention and, like you say, creating your own luck and maybe taking the opportunity, great things happen sometimes.
mhm,
Yeah, so innovation, I guess, works a bit like that as well, because you don't actually predict the end result necessarily. You kind of know what you want to achieve, but it will evolve as it goes, right?
100%. And I think also, I'm a firm believer that every individual is capable of innovation. As
Yeah.
in, I look around and, like I mentioned, with different organizations and just generally individuals that I'm surrounded by, it's just there. I think everyone's individuality is capable of innovation and just trust their instincts and going what they're passionate about, what they believe in. And that takes time for people to realize. But then I look around and there's so many individuals and organizations I know who are acting innovatively because they're just being individuals. And I
Yeah.
guess that's what inspires myself and in a personal sense as well.
Mm. And what about the metaphor part of that question then, Hithin? So, what does innovation feel like, sound like, look like?
Innovation, I feel like, just gives you a buzz.
Yeah.
It's the buzz of doing something different, doing something unique, um, exciting, I'd say. However, also innovation feels like it feels impactful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels impactful, i.e., you're genuinely helping someone as well. And the capacity to do so in a unique way is both stimulating for yourself and on a personal front. And however, it's also stimulating and it just gives you the motivation to also do it because you're also helping other people. So it's probably the best way I'd like to describe the
Yeah, I
innovation
think
I like about. Yeah.
that's a good way to describe it. And I was just thinking about when you were saying the impact. When I think of innovation, I don't think of things that are kind of a little bit better. I think of things that are significantly better. Um, and when I was asking myself the question, so Alan, what does innovation sound like? What came into my mind is somebody saying, "Wow, how did you do that?" kind of thing. Um, and what's so if you were to think about the innovation that you regard as like the best in the whole of history, what would it be?
Oh God.
Just a small question.
Yeah, of course. Ooh. I feel like Alan, I feel like I think that's too broad of a question. I just genuinely think that throughout history and throughout time, like whether that's inventions, whether that's the invention of electricity to cars to going into space, I think, or even beyond that, regarding just genuinely evolution, there's so many instances where these people, these individuals had to be innovative, had to think out of the box to do what they had to do. And especially for certain, some of those individuals had to really go against the people of the time and to really challenge thinking.
Yeah,
So it's hard to say, to be completely honest with you. Obviously, you have the likes of Elon Musk, who's really challenging certain perceptions of thinking. But also, I do think there are people like that, but also innovation, I do believe, is big and small, like you mentioned with your
yeah,
example of
yeah,
uh, example of the lady within the banking firm. And to say that I just genuinely believe that I think it's nice to see innovation and that can be seen in throughout history. Big in terms of some of the greatest inventions, but small in just terms of the little things as well. I think in innovation equals impact.
yeah,
And I think that for me is what I'll take away from that. So any innovation, whether that's big or small, has some sort of impact. Sorry I didn't answer your question there. I think, yeah, I think there are many innovations I think that have had significant impact is what I'd answer to that question. There's
yeah.
not one that I'd put one over the other.
I think it's a really smart answer though, because we were talking earlier about how people get caught up into thinking it has to be something major and are dissuaded maybe from the smaller. If we could have people thinking small is good in terms of innovation, then everybody doing something small probably has a greater impact
Great,
than a few
good.
people doing something big.
Exactly. Because to answer your question, as in some innovation and how you perceive it is also very subjective.
Yeah,
So so therefore any innovation is good, if that makes sense.
yeah,
Because like for some one person, this innovation is the best thing, but the other person, the other something else could be amazing. But end of the day, that innovation had an impact, and I think that's probably the most important thing
yeah,
because then it breeds sort of competitive mindset. And I've never been a supporter of like a competition. I think friendly competition is fantastic, but if anything, being inspired is probably the best. So just to see, just to sort of trying to illustrate what the point I'm trying to make is. So something that I think is a very apparent problem that I think Scrubbed Up and myself and the organization are trying to deal with is trying to sort of educate people on imposter syndrome. So imposter
yeah,
syndrome being the aspect of comparing yourself and making you feel down, etc., because of and not sort of have doubting yourself and that impacting your mental health. And I think the advice that you get is you shouldn't be comparing yourself.
yeah.
When actually I think that's the wrong attitude. I think when actually you should be I think it's human nature to compare yourself. I think it's human nature to compare yourself, but um just think about fair like the individuals around you and think what they're doing so well
Mhm.
when you are comparing yourself to other people and how you can implement that in your own lifestyle is a very good trait. It's easier said than done, but I think, and also the fact that you yourself have very good traits too. For example, just to take the example of medical school, the fact that you're in medical school shows that you have something about you.
Of
You
course
don't
it
you,
does.
you don't get in off a whim. You've worked hard. You have some sort of you have loads of skills. You're a very credible individual. So you have these skills, and you look at the individuals around you, and you ask yourself the question: Would I rather be surrounded by individuals that push me and lead me to think more, lead me to think differently, or maybe think, oh God, like this person's doing this. How could I do something similar, or could I use this person inspiration? and that only implements and helps yourself. So yes, but so that is comparing yourself and using other people as inspiration. And that's exactly what I want to lead to find innovation into your question. So to say something's better or worse than something is probably what I wouldn't say. If anything, each innovation should inspire each and every one of us to do what we can do innovatively and use our own opinions to essentially try and act innovatively, whether big or small. That's very subjective, though. I think innovation in itself, and as a term, is subjective because someone's innovation could be someone's, this idea has been done before. um, yeah.
Yeah, and it's so what we're saying is that the positive mindset towards comparison that you were mentioning is the key because I'll use that example that I was using earlier actually about the in New York and the different places around the world. So New York performed very, very well when we mystery shopped their telephone answering. I remember, I think it was the office in Tokyo that wasn't so good. So what we said to Tokyo was, look, New York gets a really high score, so just talk to New York and see what you can learn. And by the way, you're really good at this and they're not so good. So when you're talking to them, can you share that as well? So it was comparison, but it was friendly comparison based on everybody reaching their potential together rather than I'm better than you, look at me. So it's that mindset thing that I think is the critical difference there that you've just highlighted.
And I think something like World Values Day is a fantastic initiative because it just allows individuals and organizations from across the world to basically get inspired by each other's innovations, learn
Yeah.
from each other, and then go back on the drawing board and think, right, we learned this from this person, and essentially, I think that is essentially how that's certainly helped us as well in terms of how to become more innovative. Just to try and learn from our followers, listen to our followers, and listen to our own experiences as well. And I think that's really helped Scrubbed Up as an organization sort of grow. And yeah, I think that's hugely important to us as well.
Mhm. And when you were talking about innovation just now, and you were avoiding the question of what's the biggest innovation, you mentioned the word invention, and that prompted me to consider what's the difference for you between innovation and invention.
Mm. I'd say immediately, I think innovation is probably an idea. There's no, it's not a material object per se.
Mhm.
Invention potentially is more of a of an actual an object and a actual yeah. And I can't
A
think of the word.
creation.
A creation, yes. Rather than an innovation could be
Yeah.
a concept or an idea or a way of something to be done better. Yeah, it's probably, but I would say despite both have being different, I think they require the same sort of positive mindset, require you to take a risk, and you equally can be inspired around those around you to do both. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with what you've said there. And the other thing that comes to mind is that it feels like innovation is more accessible to everybody than invention is.
Mm,
When I think of invention, I think of like a scientist and
yeah.
kind of this upper level of people that they're the only ones that can create an invention. Where I feel I can innovate. I might not be able to invent, but I can certainly innovate. So it feels more attainable to me, actually.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think there's certainly the connotations of inventions being um very mad scientist kind of
Yeah,
vibe. And yeah, 100%. I think that whilst innovation just seems more of um a more attainable sort of yeah, word. 100%.
yeah. So let's take one of the next questions then. we've talked about innovation in a very positive way. So let's look at maybe slightly the other side of that coin. So this question, where have you noticed a lack of innovation?
Um, it's a good question. You've stumped me a bit. Um,
I'm just trying to. So for me, I remember a workplace where whenever you suggested anything, people were always shutting it down. And it was very much, this is the way we do things here, that kind of thing. And this was when I was on my industrial release from university. So I did a business degree in hospitality. And so I did an industrial release year in a hotel. And we were warned before we went, we were told, you guys will be regarded as these people who think you're smart and got all the bright ideas. So be careful. Um, and you're going to find it interesting to learn how you can go about getting those ideas through. And that's the thing, that's the scenario that popped into my mind first, because I just remember constantly having to bite my tongue or find a different way. But then actually when you tried something small and people saw that it could be better, slowly you gained trust, and then it was you and your ideas were more accepted. um,
I'd say there's something that's a very broad topic, a very complex topic. But I'd say an area that came into mind for me that lacks innovation is young people in politics,
yeah, say a bit.
where where it's a certainly an apparent problem. And I understand it from all aspects and all perspectives, as in I've tried to understand it from all perspectives, speaking as a young person or as well as from the political party's perspective. But there is certainly a frustrated, underrepresented sort of um, uh, political group per se within society, which doesn't feel like they're represented. And that just bodes problems for all aspects. And I don't think I think there is a lack of innovation in that. I'm not saying I'm the expert in that region or field, but I think just looking within, that's the first thing that popped into mind was probably that. Yeah. Um, yeah. However, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think the area that you've highlighted, like the political systems and even systems, societal systems beyond politics, there it seems that they might not be fast to change, which is definitely true. But the reason it's become more of an issue now than it was, say, 50 years ago, is because the rest of the world is changing exponentially quicker
Mm,
than it was before. And so what we've got is systems that are no longer fit for purpose.
yeah, exactly. And I guess the reason I mentioned that was because if you look at other aspects of society, innovation is taking over in terms of social media, the way we communicate is completely revolutionized over because of social media. And the reason I think democracy and the electorate system came into mind was purely because I think regarding innovation, there isn't any.
Yeah. I
Um,
remember you've reminded me of during COVID. Um, I think I remember Parliament making a decision that they would not allow online voting.
mm,
Now, why? It's like, how crazy is that? Why would you not do that? Um, and also the leadership contest that we've just had in this country. I the fact that, first the candidates are chosen by the MPs, and then second, the final choice is made by this very limited number of people who are totally underrepresented by many parts of society. How on earth can that be democratic, actually?
Mm, 100%. Definitely like 20,000 or so
Yeah.
Conservative Party members making the choice and decision. Um, at the same time, you can sort of see it from the political parties' perspectives. And I get it, but then there are I think with any aspect of society, I think the word representation is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And I think that could be and that I think that's probably where I think my issue lies with innovation within democracy. The fact
So,
that the
all
word
right.
the definition of democracy I don't think is necessarily being delivered or being addressed with the current systems in place.
So let's play for a bit then. If you were omnipotent and you could put in place one innovation in the political system in the UK, what would you be tempted to do?
Oh, right. There is this aspect of everyone has the choice to vote. But if I was omnipotent, I would make it compulsory to be to compulsory to vote.
Wow.
And what I mean by that is you if just to get everyone on the table. If they don't want to vote for the respective party, that's okay.
Yeah.
But the reason I say that is because too many of the electorate, the country's population don't vote at all. So how, from the political party's perspective, or like data is important, and when these individuals who have very rightful opinions and things to say, when their opinions aren't being considered and heard, then how or even uh, heard or considered, then how can political parties address that? Or well, they won't because they don't need to because you're not voting anyway.
Yeah.
So henceforth, that's probably why I'd suggest everyone, if I had the power to say so, everyone should be voting. And if you don't want to vote for anyone, that's fine, completely fine. You have the right to vote for who you want to vote for. But at least everyone's opinion is being heard in that respect. I think that would change. I
That
think
would be.
obviously that's a very far-fetched idea, probably in the brain of Hithin. But I think that potentially that could be really cool. But yeah, that can just stay between this conversation, I'd say. I guess. Yeah, that realistically probably will never happen. But
Well, mate, it's. I think that's the thing with innovation is that that might be. Some people might say that what you've just suggested is scary, but why would we not strive for something that is more representative of society than we've got? The one that I would do is
I was
not.
going to ask you, yeah, what would you do? What would yours be?
Well, yeah, I was thinking I would scrap the party political system and I would put in place something which meant that that group of people in parliament was truly representative of society in all its forms. So, for instance, I would love to see young people, much younger people, and I'm not sure how young you could go because you've got to have, to a certain extent, some life skills, I think. Um, but very young people. I remember this is a little bit off tangent, but I remember I was doing a talk at a university in Switzerland, and we were going out for dinner, the professor and I, that evening, and it was the day that Max Verstappen, the Formula One driver, got his first podium place. He was 16 years old. And I remember saying to the professor, just imagine if we trusted in the ability of youth in the way that this sport does allow, what could happen, what could be in place. And there's this, I think we've got this total misconception that you have to be older to add value. And I think that's totally wrong.
100%. I think certainly within just within medicine and healthcare profession, you sort of see the value of just from a small scale value of children when you're doing a patient consultation. Children are truthful, true, like young children especially are truthful, they're honest, they're often very sort of very clear about what's wrong. Even the youngest people within society, I think, have something to offer.
Yeah, you now in Values Jams, Nathan. If you play as we go forward, you'll find this out that um, what happens is that memories are sparked by the conversation, and we identified this as a theme. And I ended up getting some feedback from a psychologist in New Zealand, and what he said, he didn't confirm anything, but what he said was that perhaps because values conversations are quite deep, perhaps neural pathways are being sparked, and that's what's surfacing an old or lost memory. And so this conversation has just done it for me, because my youngest son Sam, when he was about 5, was due to go on a flight to see relatives in Germany, but his ear was really hurting him, and so we ended up taking him to casualty, and a doctor saw him, and there was a pea in his ear, frozen, the frozen
Okay.
originally.
Yeah.
Anyway, the doctor, they were having to do something, and the doctor said to Sam, and his mum told me this because I wasn't there, but his mum said the doctor was really good talking to this 5-year-old boy instead of through his mother. And he said, "So Sam, are you allergic to anything?" And Sam said, "Peas." So it just reminded me of that. Sorry, it's a silly story, but
And they happen to have a piece stuck in his ear, so did the doctor a massive favor there.
so we've gone really big with that innovation in politics, and I'm just sitting here thinking, gosh, how much better could it possibly be if those two things were put in place actually. Now there's let's play with another one of these questions. There's a question here which is ask your own question about innovation. So I'd like to invite you to have a go at this. So ask your own question about innovation, starting with who, what, where, when, why, or how. What are you
Okay.
curious to
As in
explore?
like, okay, fine. Can it start with does?
Well, yes, it can, but that's a little bit less open.
Okay, fine. Um,
Go on, you do it with does.
Actually, no, I'm trying my best to I was gonna say, what do you think the link between regret and innovation could be?
Ooh, so the link between regret and innovation. I think if you set out on a course of innovation and it doesn't work, then that's just sometimes what happens. For me, regret is when you don't try in the first place,
Yeah.
because you will always be wondering what would have happened if I had had a go. So with you and Scrubbed Up, for instance, imagine those early conversations when maybe you, instead of doing what you did, you convinced yourselves that maybe because of COVID or whatever, now's not the time. Let's just put it on hold. Let's not
Yeah.
do anything. Then you both get busy. Maybe circumstances change, and Scrubbed Up never happened. Imagine in 20 years' time, the two of you having a conversation saying, I wonder what would have happened, if we had started it up. So there's just a bit of a blurt about what comes to mind first about that connection between innovation and regret. What about you?
I'd say, yeah, 100%. I think I echo everything you mentioned. I think there's certainly any confusion. I certainly have asked myself this question. There is a difference between regret and a mistake.
Yeah.
A regret comes from actually not putting yourself, not sort of taking that risk potentially, or not trying something out, or whilst a mistake is something that was genuine. And I think throughout scrubbed up and doing this, and especially not having any prior experience of doing so, many mistakes have been made. However, would I call them however, I would never call them regrets because I feel like I've learned something from those mistakes. Obviously, they didn't feel good at the time. But I think innovation and mistakes are a very, they go hand in hand because I think you learn a lot, you become even more innovative and your innovations become a lot more refined if you make mistakes.
Yeah.
Whilst
You
yeah,
know,
whilst regret is just something that I think quite rightfully has negative connotations towards because I don't think you can be regretful and be innovative. I don't think they go hand in hand.
yeah. And it's interesting because you seem to have quite a light view of the word mistake. It's kind of you learnt. Whereas I think for most people, the word mistake is loaded in not a good way. And I think that sometimes we do ourselves a disservice because for me, a mistake is when you made what was definitely the wrong choice with the information that you had at hand. Whereas most of the time, we made the best choice according to what we knew. And maybe we didn't know some stuff. But for me, that's not a mistake. That's just doing something not as good as you might have done if you had known that other stuff.
Mm,
But like you said, if you learn through that process, it is just a process. And I think people convince themselves that they've made mistakes and then they're less likely to try again. And so I think it's a really dangerous word, mistake, unless it's got the right sort of mindset around it where it's a way to learn.
100%. I think same time though, I think mistakes do feel awful. They feel awful
Yeah.
now. I don't obviously don't intend to make mistakes and I look back and I do think, yeah, yes, I learned from it, but I'd rather have not made that mistake because they would have saved me a lot of grief. But I think if a mistake does happen, which inevitably they do, then unfortunately you didn't intend for it to happen, but hopefully you get something good out of the mistake. I think is also a very good
Yeah.
way to look at it, I guess.
Yeah. And also, I think people, when they make a mistake, are tempted to dwell on it too much rather than, okay, that has happened. That's it. That's life. Let's move forward because, that's where your energy really needs to be to make a difference rather than, like I say, dwelling on it. All right. Now, in the interest of time, I want to bring this to a bit of a close now to wrap up. So, what we're going to do is deal with the final question just for the last 4 or 5 minutes of the time that we've got today. And the last question is, what are you encouraged to do differently about innovation as a result of our conversation today?
Oh, okay. Um, I'd say sometimes innovation is getting lost lost in the idea and lost in the initial buzz. You mentioned the feelings that you mentioned. I think I'm definitely guilty of this. Lost in the buzz and the excitement um uh, and the genuine wanting to do good. And I think what today's conversation has taught me is that innovation is extremely complex. It has many facets, and I think it requires a certain sense of taking a step back, reflecting on your innovative ideas and thoughts and the way going forward. I think if I got anything from this conversation, it would be that. Yeah.
Yeah, and mine is very, very similar. And it's this thing about allowing the energy of innovation to flow through the process to arrive at the end result rather than getting kind of in the quicksand, and it's like Uber comes to mind. Uber is certainly an innovation. They have really just thrown that whole industry up in the air. Um, they've managed to achieve that in an incredibly short period of time. I think 10 years ago was the first trial of Uber with three cars in, can't remember where, San Francisco, maybe. Uh, anyway, in order to achieve what they've achieved, they've had to, put in place legal agreements. They've had employee disputes. They've had a load of stuff that they've had to sort out. I can't imagine how they've organized themselves to keep a hold of the energy towards the innovation whilst at the same time sorting all that messy stuff, the drudge stuff out. So that must
Mm.
take a particular either combination of skills or not the innovation people not allowing themselves to get into that, hiring other people who do all that good stuff really well and holding on to the innovation. Maybe I don't know the way that they've done it
And I
actually.
think innovation itself comes from a core value of wanting to make a change, wanting to make an impact. And I
Yeah,
think having that energy and reminding yourself why what chose you to become innovative is a really good exercise that just
yeah.
allows you to sort of make decisions based upon that. And I think that's a really good way to go about stuff.
So
And
with scrubbed up Nithin, how in a very practical way, what one thing could you do to keep your innovation energy flowing through your day-to-day stuff?
I'd say is I think just to constantly remind myself why we started Scrubs Up in the first place. Because I think certainly it is easy to get swept, and I certainly am guilty of this, easy to get swept away with certain aspects and certain things. But to remind yourself why we started Scrubbed Up and what motivated me to do it in the first place is a really good thing. I look back and I think it's a useful exercise. Look back in the sort of the first prototypes, the first few meetings, which makes us realize how far we have come. And then you evaluating and reflecting on that journey, what your strengths of that journey, what the weaknesses, where we could improve on, etc., where the areas of growth, and then just the act of reflection is a really good thing. So, and the art of reflection, and I'm not perfect at it, and it's something I think over time I'm definitely trying to improve at. But I think reflection will only make me more innovative, I think.
Gosh, this is making me think now because the whole concept of mindfulness is about focusing on the present, right? But what you've just said has made me think that actually to remind yourself where you've come from and to remind yourself where you're going to get to in the future almost renders the present as this kind of, I'm just here at the moment and I'm working towards this and look where I came from. So I'm not sure how that plays out actually, because it's almost the reverse of focusing on the present.
I think there's a balance to it. I think Mario and I we're having this conversation recently, where I think it's important to think for the future, think
Yeah,
but also reflect on the past. Also enjoy the present as
yeah.
in as well. Like enjoy the work that we're doing and enjoy it. And sometimes like we both certainly forget that, but enjoy the present also because you don't get the present back as well. So yeah,
Oh, that's a brilliant way to finish. And it rings true with me because two of my core values, one is enjoyment and the other is creation. So that your final words on that really sum this up so well. So
that's it.
Nitin, it's been such a pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you very much.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Alan.
Cheers.